So basically, the John Titor story, it starts in 1998. So there's this guy, Art Bell. He has this radio show called Coast to Coast AM. Basically, he deals with a lot of like mysterious like stuff. Like, gets a lot of callers from people who met aliens, time travelers, etc., etc. Anyways, one day he gets a fax from this one guy. He doesn't name himself yet, but he's like, "Yo, Art, my man, I love listening to your show and stuff. But the issue is, you have people on here who claim to be time travelers from past year 2500 AD. That's simply not possible. The reason I know this is because time travel was invented in 2034 by some scientists working at CERN in Switzerland. They made the world's first contained singularity engine, which you can use to travel backwards and forwards in time. I'm actually a time traveler. I ended up here. I'm on an assignment. And we discovered that you can't travel back past 2500. So we're trying to do some work to kind of figure that stuff out." And then he went on to say a few things about his life and stuff. So he called in, I think, one more time or like sent another fax. And then in 2000, and between 2000 and 2001, he joined an internet forum where, just for fun, he said, or just because he liked interacting with people at different times, he started sharing some information. It was basically an open AMA, like Reddit does nowadays, except with a time traveler. And he provided a lot of accurate information about his time machine. He shared pictures. He showed all his processes, etc., etc., etc. Made some predictions too. What, Han, would you like to know from the time traveler who now identified himself as John Titor?
Well, I'd like to know why the first thing he did was fact check a random radio program. I feel like that's the last thing I would do if I were to travel in the past. But
some people are just like that, Some people, like he actually expressed within these posts. I spent most of the day reading through them. There's a lot. It's worth a look if you're interested in this kind of stuff. But he was like, I do enjoy listening to this kind of media and like more like the conspiratorial stuff and like aliens, UFO kind of things, because back in 2036, they actually don't know anything about UFOs either, or crop circles, any of this kind of stuff. It's still a mystery to them. Like some of them are thinking now that they've discovered time travel. That's actually just time travelers in the future looking at them or something like that. So it's a hobby of his basically. And I think one day maybe he was a bit drunk or something. He's like, there is no way you can keep doing this or something.
You can't keep getting away with this. These time traveling inconsistencies are too much.
Yeah,
exactly. He's just gatekeeping time traveling.
Honestly, maybe that's what gives us credence. Like knowing how humans work, if someone had come back in time from the future, of course they would want to gatekeep time travel. Yeah, I'm actually a time traveler, and this is how it's supposed to work. And you guys can't be because I'm from the future.
It's petty and it's ridiculous, but the fact that it's so ridiculous that it doesn't even fit in a proper story makes it slightly more believable, I suppose.
Pettiness above all. Listen, if you're making a conspiracy theory, always aim to be petty because no one will believe you otherwise. I think that's just the golden rule we've learned.
I'll take that to heart. Well, anyways, Han, I thought your first question would be, what does this time machine look like? Because that was what most people in the forum was saying. And John Titor, our friend over here, was more than willing to supply some information. He even, Han, if you believe this, supplied some images. Have you seen these images, Matt?
Yes, they're in the game that I was talking about earlier.
Are you actually? Okay.
Yeah. At least from what I understand.
So this time machine, it looks like this. It's a bit of a box. Basically, how it works is that within it, two microsingularities that manipulate gravity. So using, I think, the subatomic particles we were talking about earlier, these are manipulated by ejecting more electrons, and based on the spin of how they spin, you can travel forwards and backwards in time. This is not a small machine. I believe it weighs around 500 pounds and can travel up to 3 people plus equipment at a time in like the field around it.
Interesting.
The issue, though, is that it's not completely precise because it's still pretty new technology for him. As he was saying, it was invented in 2034 by researchers at CERN. This model is one owned by the U.S. government. He was using it because he's actually in the army. And the year he traveled back from was 2036. So basically what you can only, he said, travel like concretely around 60 years or so before like the technology gets a bit too wobbly. It's not as stable anymore. Some people, the scary thing that he was saying is some people have traveled back further or forward further. So I think some people traveled forward to like 2,500, but they discovered in any timeline they travel forward, you can't get past 2500. It's just a blank void, basically. You can't do anything. He said they were trying to isolate the cause of this happening, why there's no time past 2500. They say something happened in 2000. It doesn't really get elaborated on too much in the story. And he's back there not for that reason, for a different reason, which we'll get about a bit later.
Was it Y2K? Is that it?
I don't believe so. The reason he's back is semi-Y2K related. I'll get to it in a second. So,
Okay.
yeah, basically, this is his time machine. Han, do you want to describe the time machine?
Well, I don't really have a good gauge of how big it is, but it kind of looks like a fridge or a really big, long, drawn-out tools chest or something.
Yeah.
I can't really see what it is. It's got like a wire on the side of it, and it's got all kinds of bibs and bobs on the inside, and like a thing. I don't know. It's kind of weird looking. It's also not a very precise picture.
But we have he actually provided some of the diagrams from the owner's manual or the operating manual, which is funny they have
They
one.
made an operating manual for this. I love that. That's so funny.
That is so good.
I bet they have an operating manual for like the F-32 fighter jet. It's like, come on, you need one for a time machine as well.
Yeah, but it just feels like he's got this IKEA guide or something to rebuild it if it somehow breaks.
Okay, on the topic of IKEA, do you know who made this?
IKEA.
No, General Electric. So it was built in partnership with General Electric and CERN.
Oh, yeah, I can see it. GE.
Yeah. It's model C204.
Okay, this theory has now become less believable because I don't think GE has the expertise to build these things.
Yet?
Yes.
Well,
come on, it could all change, Matt. It could all change.
Their fridges are anything to go by. I sincerely doubt their build quality, but
Fair
GE,
enough.
if you're hiring me in the future, I apologize for this podcast, but unless you improve the quality of your fridges, I don't really have a desire to work for you. So this is my disclosure now.
But maybe this will win you over too, for both of you. He provided
Okay.
some more pictures from the owner's manual, but he provided images of it in his car. He traveled in a car, so Back to the Future references here.
Very nice.
Yeah.
It was a truck, right?
Yes, it was a Chevy truck.
Yeah.
So American.
Allegedly, what he did is every timeline he'd travel to, he would have to leave it behind and go buy a new era-specific car because the thing is too heavy to kind of take out. But it kind of works. And when you're using it, he does say you need to use like oxygen mask. It gets really warm. So basically, what happens is it takes about, I think what he said, about an hour to travel 10 years into the past or into the future. How is this going for you, Han? How much are you believing this? Or you too, Matt? How is it going?
I'm just struggling because obviously we're going to get to that. Well, how does his concept of time work? If you can just travel back into time, what does doing anything in the past really do? I guess, like you said, it's going to be more of an alternative universes kind of thing, where if you kill Hitler in another timeline and you go back to yours, then nothing changed there.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think Matt touched upon it briefly when he was discussing what he was going to say about the theory. But what turned out to be true in theoretical physics is that the multiverse interpretation of how the world works turned out to be the right one, because you are situated on one timeline, basically. And when you go time travel, you kind of exit that timeline and re-enter a different one. So any world he kind of comes into, it's not really his home world, right? It's just a different kind of branching or version of the multiverse universe, I guess, if you can call it that way. So any action he does in our universe, like telling us that he does exist, that this does go forward, that can have some rippling effects in our universe, but it's not going to affect his own timeline because he'll eventually travel back to his own timeline. Additionally, he says that there's about a 2.5% divergence between each world from what he's noted. So this can take the form of some cars being a little different, some events playing out differently, etc., etc., etc. Oh, yes, and the other cool thing about it being a multiverse interpretation of the universe is that he says to get back to your own timeline. I'm sure this is the question you're wondering about. It's actually quite straightforward. You just time travel right back until I think a few seconds before you time travel into the past or the future. So basically, you time travel before you time travel. The one issue with that, or one of the cool things, is that you actually meet yourself quite frequently, he says. So whenever you use it, you time travel right before you're going to time travel in the first place. So you travel back to that moment, you're back on the right timeline, and you just wave yourself goodbye, basically.
I'm struggling. I am struggling with this because it feels like if you're going back to the past and with that same mechanic, then you're going into the future again to return to your own timeline. But
Yeah.
wouldn't that just end you up like what would stop you from ending up in the exact same time in a different timeline? What makes sure that that is your timeline and not just some random one? Like what's tethering you to your own timeline?
It's a good question. I believe he has some like clocks and stuff on board. I'm pretty sure John can explain this a bit better than I can.
And here it is.
Unfortunately, yeah, and here's John. uh, yeah,
I do
Matt,
have a question though.
go for it, Matt.
It's the second photo.
Yeah,
It's a picture of the car with the driving, right? It's where you would drive. Does John attest that this car was bought in America? Like he's in America, right? I'm assuming he bought this car in America too, right?
yeah. I'm not too sure. I didn't. There's a lot of text
Okay.
out there, but just
Because it looks like in this photo, the driving wheel is on the right side, not on the left side. And as a Canadian who also, I think we all drive on the left side of the road and are still on the left side of the car. It appears by virtue of the angle of this photo that the wheel's on the right side. So I find that very interesting.
Wait, which photo do you see that on?
So the rightmost photo with the driving wheel poking out, just looking at the angle of how the photo is taken, it appears that it's the right side of the car.
the rightmost.
To me, it looks like it's on the left side, and they just
Yeah,
kind of
same.
took out the right seat and
Yeah,
put the machine instead of the seat.
Okay, fair enough. Yeah. I guess maybe because the box is so slender, but maybe if it's wide enough, then you could. Okay, fair enough. Okay, I'm willing to concede on that.
Mm-hmm. So a bit about John himself. So basically, he was born in 1998. So he could be listening to us today. So hi, John, if you're listening, feel free to call in someday. I'd love to receive a fax from you. My dad still has an operating fax machine just for you.
All right.
Anyways, his universe played out a bit different than ours, or his life basically. In 2004, a civil war broke out in America. He said, or the beginnings of a civil war. It doesn't seem too likely in our timeline from what it's looking like, but a lot of what he was saying with the civil war seems eerily similar to what's going on nowadays, kind of in America. So what he says. And quote, he says, I would describe it as a Waco type event every month that steadily gets worse. And eventually that led to full-blown conflict between different sections in America. So conflict, I guess, basically started becoming a daily occurrence in 2012, and it led to a short World War III in 2015. This ended up with actually Russia, I think, attacking several American cities, or the city people, I guess that faction was. And that resulted in basically everything being kind of reset in a sense, and eventually America coming back together, but as a much more community-focused kind of way of living. More rural, more focused on community values and, just forming those relationships with people. Anyways, John was in the army for a while. He fought during this war. He was still pretty young at the time, which is interesting. But, war is not a good thing to experience, however theoretical it may be.
Like he's going to be 17 when the war breaks out, like 16, 17. So that's young.
Yeah, he was quite young.
Crazy.
Some people say it's unbelievable, but I mean, war itself is not the greatest situation to be caught up in. So I'm not going to critique his war experiences. He eventually worked up and he got assigned to this time travel unit, basically. So what they use the time travel technology for the short amount of time they've had it, beyond just testing it out, they use it a lot to repair the environmental and kind of damage that's been caused by the war, to kind of regain technologies they might no longer have and stuff like that. So one of the most devastating things that happened was there was a huge EMP type like blast which fried electronics on a lot of their computers during the time. So this led to a bit of an issue, and that's why John ended up back in our timeline. What he was searching for, I'll flip it to a picture of it, was this computer, an IBM 5100. Have you ever used one of these?
I definitely haven't. I think my mom might have, because she's been working on IT since the 80s. So maybe I should ask.
Really, I'm surprised because this thing built in 1975. I think it retailed for $10,000-$15,000 at the time.
Oh, right. Well, in that case, no, not even my mom.
Have you ever seen one, Matt?
I think like in like a museum or something of like the first computer is like how small they're getting. I think this was one of them. So.
Yes. Yeah. So the reason they wanted this computer is because it has this really cool hidden feature, which nobody knew about, even at the time John was making his post. So this is one of the things most people believed him to, or well, not most people, but what really attributed his believability is that he said he wanted this computer because he alleged it contained a unique feature. So basically, if you know how coding works and stuff, most modern coding systems are built on the Unix system of coding. This computer kind of allowed you to easily translate between old IBM code, APL, BASIC, and Unix. So he wanted to bring one of these computers back with a few tweaks from some of the original engineers to 2036. Because what was happening or coming to happen was what is known as the year 2038 problem. This is a real thing in the world, by the way. So the year 2038 problem is kind of like Y2K, where the programming kind of like the bit things. So it only goes up to 32 bits. The date is stored in a 32-bit binary, meaning there's 32 different like number things that they can use. However, it resets once it hits the year 2038 on a specific date, because that's how far it goes into the future to date. Once that happens, all the old legacy systems and like old unupdated systems kind of don't do too well. They kind of crash. And this is a real thing in our world too. So he needed that old 1975 computer to translate, I guess, some kind of patch or some way to upgrade those systems to like a 64-bit kind of operating system, because all the other IBMs in his world, especially from that time, were destroyed by the EMP blast that the Russians did. And this was officially confirmed to be a feature of that IBM model by IBM engineers in 2004 or 5 or something like that, after John Titor's posts.
But if they already had the schematics for this, which I'm assuming they would, because it's still like 1976, like it's still not that old. Why wouldn't they? Why, like, even if an EMP blast destroyed all of them, like, or render them inoperable, couldn't you just manufacture another one?
I guess they also, I think, switched a lot of kind of operating techniques and stuff like that, and maybe some of the coding, like just even like how to code that feature, it wasn't known to the public. I don't think you could find like a manual on how to create it that easily.
Well,
I think it was honestly probably just easy to go back in time, since you have this time machine now. Grab an old machine and bring it back a few.
I mean, 1975 isn't that long ago, and in 2035 there would still be IBM engineers alive, I guess, that could have done it, unless they all died.
There would be like 120.
Nah, I mean, if it was built in the mid 70s, right?
Yeah.
So let's say you're mid 30s or something, because I mean, you didn't have that. Software engineering is generally something that was not for older people back then either.
Mm-hmm.
It's not less even more so now. But I mean, let's say you were like 30 or 35 then.
Yeah.
That means you would be pretty damn old, but you'd like they'd still be alive. I think they'd still be alive. At least one or two people.
The Great
know how to
World
do
War III event killed off a great amount of people as well.
That is true.
So, I don't know. It seemed believable, just because for me the thing is they didn't know about this thing, like this hidden feature, until it was confirmed by IBM after the John Titor posts.
The only other like part of this is, well, one, why is there a reliance on? Well, I guess you're saying, right, so most programs are still based on Unix, right? And then you have 2030. Yeah, I guess my only problem would be, like, I feel like that far in the future, we would have either surpassed the need or had something more developed than Unix, or we would have already addressed and solved this problem to prevent the whole political hubbub of Y2K. I feel like we would have learned our lesson from Y2K. But secondly, like, another fairly, fair feature would be maybe this whole thing was developed by someone who worked at IBM as a software engineer, because they would most certainly know about this feature. So,
maybe
that's just me.
I can imagine. Yeah, I mean, if someone's going to do this whole shebang about being a time traveler, it's got to be some kind of nerd.
Like, someone has put a lot of thought into this. Even the whole like needing oxygen masks to like travel through time and stuff. Like, sci-fi romanticizes the idea of time travel and exaggerates the issues with it. Whereas if someone was trying to realistically portray that, of course they would work in like small details, like, hey, you can't breathe while doing your time travel-liness because the air around you becomes vaporized. Like, stuff like that is, I think, such a fine attention to detail that you could like if you're trying to make this believable, you you would address things like that, I think. So
Yeah, absolutely.
yeah.
Yeah, what really appeals to me about this case is I have this as like one thing I want to say in conclusion, but I'll say it now.
Mhm.
If I was going to predict how time travel would look and how it would be operated, this is how I think it would be done. Because it makes sense considering what we know about science, what we know about where it most likely will happen, and just shrinking it down, vehicle size, big box like that. It just makes sense. It seems like if I'm going to meet a time traveler, this is probably what it'll look like in some dirty Chevy truck.
Yeah, I think there's quite a few more warning signs. Like I don't. One of the things that I don't know if John alleges this or not. But like I don't know if the way that he describes his time machine is something of a prototype or like something that is refined in its design for like military use, because there's like two different, right, like there's prototype versions of things that get
Yeah.
used in testing, and then there are finalized versions, even if they're like one of five, and this feels like a little bit too well made. Like adding warning signs and stickers, like this feels less like a prototype, more like a finished product. So yeah,
I believe that was the one thing while I was reading through everything.
Yeah.
It did stick out to me that he alleged the first prototypes were developed in 2034, and that this was more of
Yeah.
like a finalized model. Like they had an owner's manual. Come on, but
right, yeah,
but
exactly. Yeah.
the
Yeah.
I did think that the time between a prototype and like an actual working model was pretty quick. But then again, I feel like the military works a lot quicker than we realize with all like their stealth operations and everything like that. But he did say,
As soon as
oh, I mean, really quickly,
Sorry.
he did say he thought or he predicted that like commercial time travel for like people would start coming in like 2040, 2050, he said.
So yeah, I mean, so I agree with your point that the military works quicker as long as they like. I still think time is short, because you would have to prove to the military that this time travel thing is legit and effective. Then once they realize, oh, this is cool and neat, and we'll use this for wars and stuff, they'll have to throw a lot of money at it. And I don't know if the time between throwing a lot of money at it and having a finalized product would be in that case. One of the things I think is neat, though, which you already talked about, is the whole General Electric thing. I do firmly assert that they would probably go to a private company for its construction, because they know private companies have a lot of big R&D budgets that are more than governments and would do that. So like on the whole point of like commercial space travel, as we all know, the great Bezoses and Bransons of our time are at the forefront of commercialized space travel because they simply just wanted to go to space. And I also firmly believe that we probably wouldn't have gotten there as quickly as we did if we relied on the government to do that, because they have the money and resources to do that anyway. So I mean, yeah, I think that's fairly plausible, but I also feel like that was like still a very common thing, even like during the space race. Like major corporations were funding that as well, and contributing to its eventual victory, which is still fiercely debated. But yeah, I mean, I think that's a fairly consistent point. So okay, sure, yeah.
So one point I'll just throw in is that I think even if you had a fully working unit, it wouldn't look like this, not in such a short time.
Really?
Yes. Have you ever
Okay,
seen
okay.
what the first computer looked like? That thing was massive. I think if you build a time machine, then it's going to be huge at first. And it's going to be a process of years and years to like slim it down into a model like this that can actually fit into your car. I mean, that's what I would think. If they built a time machine at CERN, it's going to be like half a building or something worth of Hadron Collider stuff building it.
John did say, kind of on that point, like I get what you mean, Han. I do think he did say in this point, Titor, he did say that the problem was less with how to control gravity and kind of how to do this process, because once they figured out how to do it at CERN, it wasn't that big of an issue. It was more creating the computers, the sensors, the clocks, all the like technical apparatus they needed to operate it in the way that it could be like used by a guy like him.
Yeah, right.
That makes sense. Yeah.
But it's interesting how much stuff he said and how much you can kind of explain it with. That's also the thing. Like there's a lot of stuff that he wrote in those blog posts and stuff, or those forum posts. And any final things you would ask a time traveler, and any final things you would ask Mr. Titor here about his case, Han and Matt, before we wrap it up, because we've been going for a little while.
Yeah. You can go ahead, Matt. You can go first.
Um, honestly, I would probably ask like what I mean the whole geopolitical landscape is, right? And especially around the economy, because I feel like a lot of, I mean, not just on his specific, but I think a lot of it hinges on the government still playing a titular role in the governance of our society, as well as like financing stuff, right? Like I feel like this wouldn't have been able to happen were it not like very regulated by the military and or the government with help private institutions. So yeah, I mean, like the way that we're going now, like everyone's vying for the decentralization of a lot of things. So I'd be really interested to see if in his timeline, decentralization is as big of a topic as it is
It
for us
very much
even now.
is so. From what
Yeah.
he writes about, basically after the Civil War, what happened is that America got split into 5 different kind of regions, which then kind of formed more their autonomous units operating under, I guess, the banner of America. And these focused more like individually on their economic and defense oriented strengths. And within these, it was very much like the way we live now in cities. That's not the life he lives there. It's very much more rural based, community values based, because they attributed a lot of what went wrong with the Civil War to just the way governance happened in America at the time. He was even writing, I think in 2020, he wrote that, or like in his year 2020, that they tried to reform the Constitution in America, or amend it completely. But they discovered that it was less the Constitution, but more how leadership was happening. So they kind of tried to redo that. But it's really interesting coming from like a political theory point of view, because it's like, this is kind of feels like where America is slightly heading towards itself, where some kind of reset kind of needs to happen. Because one of the scary things he wrote about that I thought was scary was that some people were asking him, "Oh, what happened? Don't you want to prevent the Great Civil War happening of us here?" And he's like, "I actually don't, because I think it delivered a lot of positive aspects to how society evolved into." Because he kind of looked back into how people lived in 2000 under the system that he was like visiting as completely not right, as very much not as, I guess, pure as what he was living under.
Interesting.
I love. I mean, just assuming that it's not true, this guy put a lot of effort into his story. I gotta commend it. This
100%.
honestly a very very well written work of sci-fi. Just bang on.
Yeah, this is why I love this one, because it just, I want it to be true so much, because it just, I don't know, he seems like a great guy.
I don't know.
On the topic of it being less true, so people started digging after. So the forum post didn't make a huge splash in the general community until like 2003. They got some traction. By that time, Titor had left end of 2001. He said his mission was gone, needed to do some personal stuff. Never really returned. I think the fact he never returned, as a side note, is also somewhat of a, helps the story a little, because he got much more well known in the conspiracy community and like the time travel community afterwards. It'd be so easy to do a follow up and like reap the benefits if you were after that. But regardless, in 2003, people started looking into it more, became more popular. Eventually, I think in 2008, investigators, they put literal investigators on this, they found that there was no evidence of a John Titor or person like that ever existing. However, there was a John Titor Foundation created in 2003 in Florida. Others have linked the IP addresses where he made the first post to Florida, which kind of matches because he was based out of Tampa Bay, Florida. They also found that an entertainment lawyer named Larry Haber owned this IP address, or not the IP address, this foundation. And he had a computer scientist as a brother named Richard. So theoretically, this seems like probably the best route of people who wrote this, but it's never been confirmed by them. But if you're going to ask a skeptic, and I'm going to put it in there because we're conspiracies, but we keep it a bit more realistic, they'd probably say Larry Haber and his brother wrote this tale. In 2018 was the latest link on this, and a multimedia artist named Joseph Matheny claimed that he worked as a creative consultant for unnamed people for this creating this legend. And that was basically all.
I love the fact that they would have a creative consultant to write the story. It's not just a sweaty guy behind his computer. It's just someone with a whole ass team trying to write a proper sci-fi story. Honestly, it does kind of feel like it's been written by people who know what they're doing.
Yeah.
Well, I think that I was reading about this, or when I was reading this like a while ago. I remember that I think there was one more that asserted that it was the partnership between like an entertainment lawyer and an engineer at IBM that had also crafted this. Like, there's been a number of investigations on this, from what I understand,
Yeah.
which is kind of commendable. It shows just how seriously people took this. Like, and these are the kind of conspiracy theories I like, because it means that like if the government or like private foundations commit resources to this, you know that it's like of interest and potentially of concern to them too. So that's kind of neat.
Hmm. Yeah. And it's, as you were saying earlier, Matt, too, it's kind of harmless in some senses. There's no real like dystopian plot around it. It's like basically even like John Titor's message was like, you people got to live a bit better too, kind of what I was getting the vibe from, because he kind of looked at us like we're still the barbarians in this age. We need to learn how to live a bit better. But yeah.
Yeah, that's something like, and this is fine. Like, no one's waging tyrannical wars of information over this. Like, it's a fun little story, and if it's true, very cool. If it's not, it's harmless. It's not going to kill
Yeah.
anyone.
And the image I have up now, please try and describe what this looks like, Han. But it's the coolest image ever. This was apparently a picture of his military emblem for his unit. It's so cool.
I guess it kind of looks like a flower with laser beams shooting out of the middle of it.
Yeah, it's sick.
It also looks like something I'm not going to say.
Like a lotus or something. Yeah. Yeah.
Just yeah.
It looks.
But I guess it kind of looks like a flower.
Yeah. I'm trying to. Yeah, I got what you meant the first time on.
Yeah, I cannot see it now.
I didn't put two and two together, but now it does look fairly. What's the best way to put it? Fairly.
Like that.
Yeah. Don't want to say sexual.
Oh yeah.
What's the opposite of phallic? But yeah.
Yeah. Anatomical.
Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah. Nah, just looks cool.
It's anatomically suspect, but I guess that could just be something that wasn't intentional.
Maybe that's
that
why I
might
like
just
it
be
more. I just thought it looked
dirty
really cool.
minds.
Subconsciously.
Yeah.
Anyways, yeah.